She's I'll let her do the introduction. But Gabby, take it away.
Hi, Kim. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for the kind words. I'm Gabby Queenan, and I am our sustainability manager in the town of Needham. And I will pass it over to Justin next, and then Tom.
Hi, everybody. I'm Justin Saviano. I'm the assistant town engineer for Needham.
Hi, I'm Tom Ryder. I'm town engineer for Needham.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And I think Doris, take it away.
Great. Thank you. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Maybe I can get some nods if you're able to. Excellent. Yep. Thank you. All right. So as I mentioned, my name is Doris Jenkins. I am a project engineer, and I worked closely with the town of Needham as well as CRWA and our team at Weston and Sampson to look at the Alderbrook priority site and really dig into some flood resiliency opportunities for this location. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this site, but just zooming in a little bit, we are located just around the intersection of Dedham Ave and South Street at the Needham Building Department, Public Works Department, and around DeFazio Park. So the town of Needham submitted this project because they had concerns about the flooding from Alderbrook at this location. So this screenshot here shows the Charles River flood model that was mentioned earlier by Julie. And as a part of this project, the flood model has been updated. And so this graphic here shows the 2070 10-year storm event. And you can see the flooding extents and depths through these graphics. So the colored polygons themselves represent the extents of flooding, and the depths are represented by the different colors, the different shades of blue, with dark blue being deeper. And so this is a zoomed in screenshot of our site, but this one shows it a little bit further out. So you can see here the main stem of the Charles River and how the priority site is located in proximity to that. So it is just to the northwest of the Charles River main branch. And so this site has a lot of different terrain and topography. It is located adjacent to the Needham Reservoir. There are large parts of it which are impervious, including the building footprints as well as the parking lots and the DPW yard. And at the top of the hill by DeFazio Fields, there's a gravel lot that is acting somewhat as a pervious surface, but over time also starting to act as an impervious surface. And so we'll be going through the site more specifically and looking at different solutions. So starting with the first concept. So this stem of Alderbrook here located at the South Street crossing. This photo is of the existing condition. So we took these photos at a site visit this March, and it was very evident to us the amount of sediment that was present in the stream bed. And we are aware of the August 2023 flooding that you all experienced, in particular at this intersection. And so this culvert, which you can see on the lower right-hand side, half of it is actually blocked by a downed tree at this point. And so to us, this very much shows that this was a point of constriction and that there was a lot of sediment coming down the stream at this point. And so our first concept is to assess the culvert for its capacity to understand if it is undersized or not, and also look at revitalizing the stream bed, which could include a number of things, such as potentially removing some of the sediment, but also looking at the vegetation that's currently growing there and seeing how more or less vegetation might help. You can see that the houses in this area are located pretty close in elevation to the stream bed. So the floodplain itself doesn't have a lot of protection from the structures around it. So the first overall big idea concept is looking at stream restoration. And so this is the upstream conditions. So looking up from the road stream crossing towards the DPW. And this is the downstream. So you can see the downstream has a lot less of that sedimentation in the stream bed. And so what that means to us is that likely the Charles River is flowing freely, or Alder Brook is flowing freely into the Charles River downstream of this crossing, but upstream it's being held up a bit. So the second concept that we looked at for this site is creating a bioretention basin close to the Public Works building. And so existing conditions show that there is a gravel swale that the town engineering department and Public Works department have helped put together to control some of the flows coming from the parking lots on the site. Based on the amount of sedimentation, it seems like the swale is very well used. And that was confirmed by our site walk with Justin and Gabby. And so one of the things we propose here is you can see where the water wants to go. And so it's often best to meet the water where it's at. And so putting some sort of bioretention to interrupt the flow of water before it continues downstream into that main intersection and into the red pine stand, capturing some of those flows. And bioretention systems can be lined. So for example, we could line it on one side so that infiltration would be limited towards the building, because I know there are concerns about water actually getting into the building if we are to encourage infiltration at this site. And so doing a sort of lined system to control the flow of the water near the building footprints could be a really great tool to use at this location.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah, could you explain in layman's terms what a bioretention basin is?
Yes, absolutely. So a rain garden is more of like a layman's term for what a bioretention basin does. The main difference between a bioretention and a rain garden is that rain gardens are very much using existing soils and they can still use native plantings. And it basically means you have a landscaped area that is depressed rather than elevated. A lot of the time, when we see landscaped planted areas, they're elevated. So it just means depressing it so that the water has a place to be held. Bioretention systems are very similar, but they're more of an engineered system. So you can get additional storage through specific soils and use of rocks. And they usually have an overflow system into the actual stormwater system. So they have pipes in them as well.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. So this is again just that same location, and this is an example of a bioretention system that we installed at a park in Lynn, Massachusetts, showing that kind of linear swale that has depressed room for stormwater. So the next location we're looking at is up in the DeFazio parking lot. So this is the gravel lot that I mentioned that is intended to act as impervious, but as pervious, so water can infiltrate through the gravel. But over time, there will be areas that get more compacted due to vehicles or just general topography and silt buildup. So this location, this is at the bottom left-hand corner of that lot. And when we went out there, and it seemed like for much of the time, there is standing water in this corner. So what that is from is likely there's a lot of compressed gravel in that location and there is a divot. And so the water is being held there. And so again, if the water naturally wants to go there, we need to figure out how to get water captured in a more productive way at that location. So doing in kind of L shape of that same rain garden or bioretention system that would allow the water to be captured in an intentional area and hopefully infiltrated into the ground would expand the amount of parking, or rather reduce the amount of parking that is lost to standing water in this location. So this next concept is stream renaturalization, and there's a couple different components to this one, so I will walk you through it as a whole. But this branch here is gathering water and carrying it down along the side of the DPW building and the cold storage building for the public works. And then it's being piped into a channel which comes underneath Dedham Ave and feeds into Alderbrook. And so what we're seeing here is there's a lot of channelized stream flow, which means that the stream water can't infiltrate into the ground, and it probably isn't as large as the stream would want to be naturally. It's man-made, so it's very much reduced in size. So the first concept at this location is removing a culvert. So there's about, I think, a 50 to 100 foot section of culvert running along Dedham Ave that was installed to be a potential driveway into the similar area as the DeFazio lot, but it was never constructed upon. And so this was something that we spoke about with the town engineering department, and they expressed interest in removing this culvert because it has been difficult to maintain. So reducing it could actually, or removing it could actually reduce the amount of maintenance that needs to be done, as well as encourage more natural flows. You can see kind of the amount of sediment. And there was actually evidence of the water coming up and over this culvert, which means it is a restriction point in the stream, which means it contributes to the flooding because the water isn't allowed to flow freely. So the first concept is actually removing this bit of culvert. The second section is renaturalizing this bit of stream. So it was pointed out to us that by the engineering department that this building is hopefully under the process of being relocated just to the side here. So with this building being relocated, that's this building here in that right-hand photo, there's an opportunity to actually remove that channel and renaturalize the stream so that it has the ability to flow as it is intended to, with a little bit more curves and natural things to slow it down. When we put water in a concrete channel, it can move a lot faster than it naturally would if it was in a stream bed with rocks and vegetation and things like that. So there's many advantages. There's ecological benefits to renovating the stream or revitalizing the stream, but there's also hydrologic benefits to slowing down that water. And there's actually water coming behind the building as well. So kind of as a whole here, figuring out how to increase the path of the stream and remove these concrete channels. And so when the water comes along this building, it feeds into this larger channel that is made of stone before crossing underneath Dedham Ave. And so here too, looking at figuring out a way to potentially make this a safer and more natural stream bed that can act more as the stream naturally would prior to development could help with that stream, could help with mitigating the flooding on this site. And then the last part of this stream restoration concept is the idea of a wetland restoration project. So just inland of that culvert and where the stream kind of comes together is a section of woods that is really in poor condition. So it's overrun with invasive species such as oriental bittersweet and black locust trees. Those species are not providing any ecological benefit, as well as there were wetland species presence like reeds and phragmites. And so that means to us that the land there could be very much salvaged and renaturalized with native species, and especially wetland species, because if the land already wants to be wet, allowing the water to congregate there and act as almost a pause point during those higher flow storm events could very much help slow down the water before it comes down this channel and gets backed up underneath that road stream crossing. So the idea here is just to provide a location for the water to slow down so that when we're getting those increased precipitation events and we're getting more rain than our current systems can handle, we have a place for the water to go that isn't in the roadways. And then one of the last, sorry, who was speaking?
I just had a question.
Sure.
I noticed you don't pay any attention to the Needham Reservoir. How do you view that, the reservoir?
Yeah, if it's okay with you, we'll touch on that after we finish the last concept, because then we'll get into the larger discussion, which will include the Needham Reservoir. So if it's all right with you, I have one more slide and then we can touch on that question.
Okay.
Thank you. So the last concept that we're including is the idea of resilient forest succession planning. And so there is a large red pine mature stand located behind the Public Works building. And what this means is that it's a large stand of all of the same species trees, and they're all very much the same age, likely because they were planted at the same time. And so these red pine stands are very prone to toppling over, especially if you have really inundated root systems, so really wet soils around them. And this is a concern that was brought up to us by the engineering department and the other folks in that Public Works building, because it's a new building, and if a tree were to fall on it, that would be really detrimental. So one of the things that we looked at is including succession planning, which means as it doesn't mean like clear cutting the stand. What it means is looking at regeneration, so introducing native species in the understories, which can help increase the stability of the soils, but it can also help account for new canopy cover so that if all of those trees died at the same time, you wouldn't be losing a really nice stand of forest. And so starting to introduce a mixture of species as well as different understory species. So that's the last concept on this site. And so I'll leave it up on this slide because this kind of has the larger image that covers all of them. With regards to the Needham Reservoir, Indrani, are you able to speak to the modeling piece of that and how that was included at all?
Yeah, and we can take a closer look at it when we model the impacts of these concepts that Doris covered, as we will be developing. Once we receive feedback from you all at this meeting, we will be feeding the input from these priority site concepts into the flood model to see what the benefits are in terms of flood reduction, first to assess what the flood risks are and how these concepts are mitigating it. We did model the reservoir as having, with the bathymetry information and the storage associated with it. Was there a specific question that you had related to the impacts of these particular concepts on the reservoir, or was there something else you wanted to bring up?
I was just noticed it wasn't included. It seems to be undergoing a lot of eutrophication, I guess that's the term for it. And I didn't know whether it was people want to dig it out or let it become a meadow, or what's the best thing there?
So one thing that I can add to the benefits or the concepts that Doris presented, all of them, because they are centered around infiltration and retention practices, all of these concepts will have improvements to the water quality of the stormwater runoff, which eventually would find its way into the reservoir. So at a minimum, these concepts that we're presenting are not going to at all harm or exacerbate any water quality issues. In fact, it would provide water quality benefits as it relates to phosphorus, as well as other water quality improvements that associated with mitigating the stormwater runoff.
We may be able to answer a little bit more of those questions too, Robert. We do have sediment review.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We have a sediment removal project that is going to be underway this season to be completed by the end of October. So there is a portion of the reservoir that will have sediment removed, as well as some stormwater treatment before the discharge over by DeFazio is introduced into the reservoir. We're also looking upgrading as well. So this kind of out of scope of what Weston Sampson is looking at. So we're going further, I'd say north towards Harris Avenue location for more BMPs, for more stormwater management as well for the reservoir. But we do have a project that is going to be underway very shortly. Notices will be, we're going to be put up a kiosk with information at the reservoir in the near future. But we have that information too if you want to take a look at it.
All right. Thank you.
Tom, a follow-on to that question. The concepts that are being considered here, will they be diverting flow away from the reservoir and reducing the amount of discharge going in there?
So it looks like these concepts are on the downstream side of the reservoir. But I think it was very well presented. I do like the opportunity of the wetland restoration area. I think Justin and I have looked at that closely. Gabby's been out there too, and Kim. There's good opportunities that they're showing on this plan.
I have a couple of questions if we're moved into that part of the presentation.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I was curious whether as you said, most of the changes you're talking about are in the downstream portion of the brook. I'm wondering if it's been taken into consideration what the impact would be on a little further upstream, where I live on Alderbrook Lane, and the brook kind of goes around the street in the background in the woods. I know that some of the neighbors here have flooding issues. I don't think they're related to the brook, but I'm just wondering whether there might be any positive or negative impact on that. But what do you see in general? You mentioned sediment, for example, at the mouth of the brook where it goes into the river. There's clearly a lot of sediment and trees and other detritus in the stream, and I'm wondering if your analysis, your study, has taken any of that into consideration, or are you just focusing specifically on the improvements that you've described here?
So we are focusing on this specific location as it pertains to actually making modifications and or proposing concepts to make modifications. But in looking particularly at the stream restoration piece, we are looking very much at the upstream impacts. And so that is a huge part of why we run the model on these, because it allows us to understand what sort of upstream and downstream impacts might come, positive or negative. And so that's the great thing about us, is it lets us kind of test out the solutions and modify the parameters that we're inputting so that we can understand how to better help those folks both upstream and downstream.
And I presume that impact will be included in the proposal when it comes out.
Yes, in the final project summary.
And my other question is a little more practical, or a little more financial. What happens when this? How is this work going to be funded? And does the town does it have to go through town meeting to get approved and funded? Does the state contribute? I'm just curious as to the financial aspect of the proposal.
Yeah, Dira, do you want to speak to that at all?
I can definitely speak to the portion about how this fits into the larger Charles River flood model work, which is funded through a couple of different avenues, including the state. So the work that's being done today by Weston and Sampson is being funded through that avenue. But as this project goes further, we will be working with the town to pursue different funding. I don't know, Gabby, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think you captured that really well. As was said, this is great information for us to have on the town side, because the modeling work that's being done and the concepts really kind of lay solid groundwork for us to pursue additional funding opportunities. To the extent we'll be looking at outside funding from the state or federal resources, that's going to be another conversation. And whether we have to look at town funding as well, that's kind of the next stage. But right now we're focused on completing the concept designs and making sure that we get, the best public input that we can. So those are really solid.
So funding is a little TBD at this point.
And I will just add that what Julie Wood mentioned in the larger meeting is that other communities in the Charles River watershed who are part of the Climate Compact, like Needham, through the prior phases where similar concepts as we're doing here for Alderbrook have been developed, those communities have then been able to take that concept and apply for their individual state-funded grant applications, whether it's MVP or other avenues, as well as Gabby mentioned, pursue federal funding through the BRIC, through the FEMA BRIC program. So those are certainly applications, as well as we've done successful the Charles River Watershed Association has successfully helped communities through congressional earmarks as well. So a lot of those avenues can certainly be explored for Needham here as well for this site, if the town chooses to go forward with it.
Great, thank you. And my final question is, are you, as far as implementing this is concerned, ideally, are you looking at, within the next several years, further out? What's your thoughts about time frame?
I think I'll take that one. We would like to implement everything today if we could, but as you pointed out, funding is always an issue. So once the concept designs are finalized, or at least developed to the point where we can start looking at other funding opportunities, it will depend on what funding we can get for what portions of this project. We would love to be able to do all of them all at the same time. However, it's probably going to be in a phased process. So I would say that we would pick and choose the pieces of these concept designs that are most beneficial and most appropriate at the time. Like was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, one of them depends on the building moving. So that building moving is not happening for at least another couple of years. It will happen over the next couple of years. So that whether that project could get done now is probably unlikely. But the other ones that don't affect other actual construction that is already happening could be done sooner. So I think the short and long answer to the question is more, it is going to be a phased project, but we're hoping to do the phases in whatever most benefits the area the best first, and then coupled by the fact of if we can get funding for it.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate your
absolutely answer. I would love to fund, if you want to fund the whole thing, I will have them get started tomorrow.
Highly unlikely, but thanks for asking.
I hear you.
Any other questions? Thanks, Kim and Gabby and everyone else. That's really helpful input.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions.
Sure. Dira, how are we doing on time, just out of curiosity?
We're good. We have, I'd say, about 6 to 10 minutes to keep going.
Great. Just wanted to check in. Go ahead, John.
Trying to understand how these various options, and by the way, nice presentation on laying out the different ideas, being able to calculate and figure out how much runoff can be either eliminated or attenuated, and seeing how it can really impact flooding. Does the flood model, I don't believe it extends up into tributaries. Maybe I'm wrong, but how will those calculations be done, and how will they flow into the overall flood model?
Sure. So I can start just with the how we estimate the volume stored. So for most of these opportunities, we can estimate a volume of stormwater captured based on the size of the systems and the amount of storage that the actual systems provide upon construction. And so for most of these, there are specific, like, there's a series of equations and calculations that we use to say, okay, if we install this bioretention basin based on the footprint, we can estimate that we're storing X cubic feet of water. And same thing for the stream restoration. We look at the conduits in the model and the size of them, and then we look at what we would like to increase the width and the depth of the river to, and then we can make those alterations in the model. As far as the actual model, we can understand how much of that volume will be utilized based on the storm events. In most of them, because of the nature of our solutions being fairly small, a lot of them are filled for each storm event. But for something like the larger solution of like a wetland restoration, where you might be creating a significant additional volume of storage, it might not fill up under the short-term storms, such as the present day smaller storms, but then we might see it really start to kick in those larger storm events. But I'll let Indrani add to that.
Yeah, you captured it all, Doris. Just to add to that, it's a great question, John. So we are, as we're getting input, like I mentioned, from this meeting, our modeling team will be honing in on each of these concepts and simulating what the flood storage and the stormwater runoff volume reduction, as well as what the impacts would be in terms of extent of area flooded reduction also. So we will be able to estimate those flood reduction benefits, particularly as it relates to volume and percent area flooded or reduced in terms of flooding. For this site, we will be able to report it sort of at that subcatchment scale, which is a finer scale. The whole model, this whole 270 square miles, has been discretized into 3,000 very smaller subcatchments. So we will be able to report it out at the nearest subcatchment scale, which includes this site.
Do you think in the future it's possible for the model to be extended up into tributaries, so you can really have sort of direct connection and not just side calculations that you feed into the model?
Yeah, it's again a great question. It has that type of extending to get into the details of all the tributary systems for a model of this scale, for a regional scale model, just makes the computational process very intensive. So what that process that you mentioned could be approached sort of at a submodel scale, where we could break up the, this larger area of the larger impact area or larger catchment area of Needham, and sort of add more details from the tributary areas into that submodel, instead of trying to do it for the full regional model, where it may not necessarily be very representative to show the benefits of these projects at the scale that we're looking at.
I mean, that really makes sense to me. And it almost seems like at the community level, perhaps there are opportunities for CRWA to get some MVP funding to really do some modeling at the kind of sub-regional basis.
That is an excellent idea, and that is something that CRWA has been working on with other adjacent communities in the watershed.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to make sure I'm sure we have time to get to Ross's question as well.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, my name's Ross Donald, and I came across this event through the Climate Action group in Needham. And the town has taken an interest in flooding, stormwater management, and so forth. And I think the flooding has been more prevalent and lately. And I'm wondering about the concepts here, whether they can be utilized sort of. I don't live close enough. I mean, there might be some opportunities for development that would use these ideas. I live in public housing, and that's Linden Chambers, and we're looking at the flooding there as being a significant issue that needs to be addressed, and the flooding is likely to get worse as our projections seem to indicate. But the concepts that you're offering, the housing authority is not really handling the drainage system that's there now. They aren't managing the canals, the surface drains. There are only a few places that are really collapsing. It should be maintained. In my opinion, I was a contractor, and I took an interest in foundation work and drainage and things like that on a residential scale. I guess my question is how I like the idea of a kiosk. I didn't catch what was going to be information was going to be delivered there at the reservoir. But I'd be very interested in bringing some of this information to groups like the Housing Authority that do have control of a lake of 11 acres there. A lot of it's going to be unbuildable because of the wetlands, but that just is an opportunity. You know, some people look at it as you know, Florida Everglades was a swamp until somebody looked at it again, and you know, it became a kind of an whatever it became. But so there's the question, and I do have, if you could address that in any way.
Sure. Dira, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can add from CRWA's perspective for this project. You know, a lot of the projects that have come before this too has come from the community. And so part of our engagement process is to get ideas from the community members of where they would want to see these concept designs and projects being built. And so part of the work that we've done previously is actually do host workshops at specific housing authorities in other towns. So we be more than happy to potentially host one at yours. And so I'll probably reach out to you after this meeting to discuss. I saw Justin unmute.
Yeah, so what I was going to add on a side note to the Linden Chambers, me and Gabby have also been working on some other grant funding to actually implement some pilot projects in that area. And similarly around town, where we're trying to take out these man-made wall systems that have been just a nuisance to maintain, and reclaim some of the natural streams and bank and create more storage as we move downstream. So we are actually currently looking at the Linden Chambers area and to collaborate with the new development in order to not necessarily this exact scope, but similar pilot projects that will alleviate some of the flooding, and piece by piece we'll be working through the town in order to implement these types of projects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to add to that is partnerships with with the uh, with the housing authority, the nearby residents on Maple Street, and the school across the street. That's the idea, is just bring up start up with the partnerships to, you know, to define locations where we can like, you know, remove those walls and create more storage areas as well. The kiosk question is through conservation, through the Conservation Commission. Uh, they've been talking about putting a kiosk at the Needham Reservoir for a long time. And when we were developing the sediment removal project, we talked to them about this is a great opportunity to so that people know what's going on in the area and maybe add some education, public participation methods to whatever stormwater treatments that we have going on, so people kind of know the area a little bit more. So that's the whole idea of the kiosk.
Yeah, yeah, terrific. We just restarted a local tenant organization, and we want to get the residents involved and I was very interested in the gardening projects, trails, pathways, and so forth. Um, and I think there are a lot of opportunities there. And glad to hear you're looking at it. I have a pretty good photographic record of the last 14 years of the ebbs and flows. Every 3 or 4 years, 5 years now, maybe for sure, it overflows the banks of the canals. And it's now we don't at the Housing Authority, the Linden Chambers cluster housing, and the brick buildings. There's no basement. So we don't have any flooding problems. It's Maple Street, and the developers' houses that develop these buildings for the market rather than for the site, unfortunately. So they sold really well. Everybody wants a basement, but you don't want a basement that floods. And I think it's been a catch up. And I don't know how the salt problem is going to be solved easily. But I like this nature-based approach. I like the language for sure. So I like greening the built environment. That's what I want to see. We aren't going to be taking anything down, I believe, anymore. That's not a sustainable approach. We'll get used to the idea of buildings that they either can be taken apart and reassembled some other place or just maintained. I think this whole idea of the tear down buildup of Linden Chambers is all wrong. But we have to prove an alternative. I think it's going to be, building that's inclusive of nature and so forth. I'm looking at those brick buildings as potential for passive solar retrofits. If we can solve the radon problem, I don't know about that, but it's a whole other thing. I did have a question about where on the map where it was titled stream daylighting. Is that where the culverts were and they were going to be? Is there any idea or concept behind daylighting that you can elaborate on?
Yes, we use the word daylighting just because it's underground, and the idea is
Right.
to expose the water to the daylight. I suppose it's a industry term.
Okay, sure.
Do you have time for one more question? Or is somebody else?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Or
let's do one more question.
I just had a question on the stream restoration that you had down by Alderbrook before the South Street culvert. You're talking about like a sediment removal, reshaping, creating more. I haven't walked that portion of the stream, but I've seen like photos, so kind of like the photo that you shown.
Right.
Um,
I'll just pull it back up. Yeah, I think stream restoration could mean a lot of different things. I know Gabby had an interesting conversation with Alex and I about specifically looking at historic land use maps or photographs to see what the stream bed and the floodplain looked like prior to some of the development, because that can help give an idea of what was there and what was intended to be there. So specifically with like some of the vegetation, whether there was more or less vegetation and whether the stream had more sinuosity or whether it was channelized, I think kind of restoring the idea of restoring the floodplain. A lot of these rivers in more developed areas have been forced into a straight channel. And so thinking about how to increase the path of the river, give it more land to cover and more space to slow down, as well as actually create a productive floodplain that's intended to get wet during storms rather than a floodplain that hurts private property owners.
like a sediment, sediment removal, creating wider spread of the, shallow water flows throughout that area.
Right. And sediment removal is definitely part of it, and thinking about what it was before, but I think in general, like making the channels deeper and wider isn't always the right answer because that can just help, that can make it become more eroded over time. And Johnny, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say slope stabilization as well as
Yes.
looking for additional opportunities for vegetation, for retention opportunities along the banks of Alderbrook could be opportunities that can be considered. I know adjacent community like Newton is looking for something similar for the Cheesecake Brook area for that portion of the stream. So those would all be potential opportunities to consider, Tom.
Right. It's very much evident that there's like undermining of the banks here. And so thinking about using riparian species to stabilize those as well as different different engineered systems can help make it so that when the water comes through, it's not scouring and that can cause less erosion if you're able to do more bank stabilization. But for that, if we were to pursue that concept further, that's when we would bring in the real stream ecologists and restoration engineers.
Don't sell yourself short. I think you guys are doing great.
Thanks, Kim.
All right. So I'm looking at time. It's 7:40, so we just went a little bit over time, but thank you everyone for staying and asking your questions. I've noted them down, and the project team will reconvene, and we'll have updates to make. And then, like Julie said, don't forget to register for our June meeting where we will be presenting kind of a whole of what we've been doing for the past year. And when you exit or when you leave this meeting, there will be a pop-up survey about the sites that we just covered. If you have more things or more questions or more comments as you're leaving, definitely feel free to input in them, and then that will be shared with the project team as well. I also want to thank Kim and rest of Needham folks for joining, and Doris and Indrani for presenting, and for folks joining and sharing your input. Definitely feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions as well.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to everybody too. The CRWA has been a huge help in partnering with a lot of our information. I know the flood model has been a long and arduous process, and Ronnie has been inputting. I can't even imagine she was dreaming without numbers, but the whole project team has been great at facilitating conversations between different communities and has been a great resource to figure out what other people are doing, because as they said, the Charles River affects a lot of communities and is a really long and big watershed area, and to see what other communities do that may affect other neighboring communities is very helpful in determining what we should be doing in our own community. So thank you everybody for coming, and I appreciate everybody's input, especially all of our public residents and other people, because we want to know what you think of what we're doing, because we do work every day and work hard every day, and we like to see that other people are engaged as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you all.
All right. I think they're still on in the other room.
Right? Okay. Yeah. We're not reconvene. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not reconvening as a group, but I'm pretty sure they're still on in the other room. So I think I'll leave this room and join the other room. I don't know what you guys are trying to do, but I think if I close this room out, let me see.
I think Julie said the individual rooms can just hop off, I think, once we end.
Yeah. So you guys definitely feel free to jump off. I think I'm probably going to jump to the main room to close out as well after.
Okay.
Sounds
all
good.
Right. Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you, dear.
Thanks.
Doris. That was
Thanks.
great.
Have a good night. Bye.